January 1996. The United States was riding a wave of economic optimism. Bill Clinton was in the White House, the internet was just beginning to enter everyday life, and Americans were settling into the comfortable routines of a post-Cold War world. Across the eastern seaboard, families prepared for what they assumed would be just another cold winter week. Supermarkets buzzed with shoppers buying ordinary groceries. Commuters mapped out their morning schedules. Children looked forward to school. No one, not the meteorologists, not the politicians, not the millions of ordinary citizens, truly understood what was coming. What descended on America's East Coast between January 6th and 8th, 1996, was not just a snowstorm. It was a meteorological monster of historic proportions. A catastrophic nor'easter that buried cities under 4 feet of snow, killed hundreds of people, shut down the federal government, paralyzed transportation networks, caused billions of dollars in damage, and left an entire nation gasping in frozen silence. This was the blizzard of 1996, also known simply as the megastorm, and it remains one of the most extraordinary natural disasters in the history of the United States. This is the story of that storm, how it formed, where it struck, what it destroyed, who it killed, how America responded, and what it ultimately taught a nation about the raw, unstoppable power of nature. To understand the blizzard of 1996, you must first understand how the atmosphere builds its greatest weapons. Winter storms of this magnitude do not simply appear. They are the product of a complex and violent atmospheric ballet, a perfect collision of competing forces that, when aligned in just the right way, unleash chaos on an almost unimaginable scale. The story of the 1996 megastorm begins several days before the first snowflake fell. A powerful upper-level disturbance had been tracking southward across the United States, diving deep into the Tennessee Valley. As this atmospheric disturbance moved, it created the perfect conditions for a low-pressure system to develop in the warm, moisture-laden waters of the Gulf of Mexico during the early morning hours of January 6th, 1996. Low pressure developed in the Gulf of Mexico early on January 6th, with an inverted low pressure trough extending northward into the Gulf Coast states. As the system moved east-northeastward, 2 additional centers of low pressure formed, creating a complex and intensifying weather machine. This is a classic atmospheric setup. Warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico rising rapidly, cooling as it climbs, and releasing enormous amounts of energy in the form of precipitation. At the same time, something equally critical was happening to the north. A massive Arctic high-pressure system had entrenched itself across the northern United States and Canada, pumping bitterly cold air southward into the mid-Atlantic and northeast regions. When the warm, moist Gulf air crashed into this wall of cold Arctic air, the resulting clash was catastrophic in meteorological terms. Cold air from Canada pushed down and collided with relatively warm winds from the Gulf of Mexico. The clashing weather fronts caused a terrible combination of snow and wind that would define the next 48 hours across a huge swath of America. What made this particular storm extraordinary, what elevated it from a memorable blizzard to a true megastorm, was the process called bombogenesis. This is a rapid intensification event in which a storm's central pressure drops dramatically in a very short time, dramatically strengthening winds and precipitation. The coastal storm went through this rapid intensification process during the evening of January 7th and into the early morning of January 8th. This rapid intensification allowed the pressure gradient to tighten, which is not only a sign of a mature storm system, but also means a dramatic increase in wind speeds. The result was a storm that meteorologists would later classify as a Category 5 extreme event on the Northeast Snowfall Impact Scale, NESIS, the highest rating possible, shared by only 2 or 3 storms in the entire historical record. January 6th, 1996. The beginning, the blizzard of 1996, did not announce itself with great drama at first. In Washington, D.C., the capital of the most powerful nation on earth, snow began falling during the early afternoon of January 6th in a manner that seemed entirely unremarkable. Residents had seen snow before. The forecast called for accumulation, but no one yet imagined the scale of what was to come. Through the afternoon and into the evening, snow fell at a consistent rate across the Washington-Baltimore corridor. At the time most federal workers had left their offices, roads were slick but passable. Hotels were full, restaurants were open, and life continued more or less normally. But somewhere high in the atmosphere above, the storm was building its terrifying momentum. Meanwhile, in Virginia, the storm was already showing its teeth. In Lynchburg, a record-breaking 20 inches of snow fell in a single day, a number that stunned local meteorologists. The Shenandoah Valley was already disappearing under 3 feet of snow. Governor George Allen declared a state of emergency as power lines went down and people found themselves trapped in their homes. At least 8 weather-related deaths had already occurred in Virginia alone. Further south, the storm had reached the Carolinas. In South Carolina's Piedmont region, residents faced 1 to 3 inches of snow, along with sleet and freezing rain, conditions that made highways treacherous and caused several injuries. Though the southern states were not buried the way the Northeast would be, the storm was already demonstrating its enormous geographic reach. January 7th, 1996, the fury unleashed. If January 6th was the storm's arrival, January 7th was its full, devastating fury. Across the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, what had begun as a manageable snowstorm transformed overnight into something that most Americans had never witnessed in their lifetimes. In Washington, D.C., after a brief lull that had deceived many into thinking the worst was over, the storm returned with devastating force during the overnight hours. Extremely heavy bands of snow came in from the east as the system slowly crawled northward. The nation's capital, which had already received 13 to 17 inches, was about to get far more. Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, was experiencing something historic. By the morning of January 7th, the city was buried. Snow was falling faster than plows could remove it. Streets that had been cleared just hours earlier were buried again. Philadelphia International Airport, the official city observation location, would ultimately record 30.7 inches of snow from the storm, making it the most significant single-storm snowfall in the city's entire recorded history. The previous record, set decades earlier, was a mere 21.3 inches. That record was not just broken, it was shattered. The 27.6 inches that fell on Philadelphia on January 7th alone remains the greatest single-day snowfall on record in the city to this day. Workers who struggled into their offices that morning often could not get home again. The city's infrastructure, its roads, its trains, its emergency services, was being pushed beyond its limits. New York City, never a place easily impressed by winter weather, was also reeling. Central Park recorded 20.2 inches, the 6th highest single-storm total in the city's history, dating back to 1869. Radio City Music Hall, that great symbol of New York glamour, provided the backdrop for streets so empty and snow-covered that the city looked abandoned. A church roof in Harlem collapsed under the weight of the snow, injuring several people. Barns across Pennsylvania were collapsing in some locations. Snowdrifts were already reaching 8 to 10 feet. As the storm moved northeast, it continued to break records. Newark, New Jersey, received a total of 28 inches over several days. Providence, Rhode Island, received 32 inches. The Berkshire Mountains of western Massachusetts and the northern hills of Connecticut saw up to 33 inches. January 8th, 1996, Pekin Passage. By January 8th, the storm had fully gripped the Northeast. Wind gusts were reaching 50 miles per hour across much of the region. And in some areas, particularly in New Jersey, where Morristown Municipal Airport recorded gusts in excess of 63 miles per hour. True blizzard conditions prevailed, with visibility reduced nearly to zero. The storm's most extraordinary snowfall totals were recorded in the mountainous interior regions. In Pocahontas County, West Virginia, a staggering 48 inches of snow, 4 full feet, accumulated. Snowshoe, West Virginia, recorded similar totals. In the Shenandoah Valley, 3 feet of snow had fallen. In Page County, Virginia, 37 inches were measured. 2 buses collided in Pittsburgh as roads became nearly impassable, seriously injuring 52 people. Across Pennsylvania, barns and agricultural structures were collapsing under the tremendous weight of the snow. Supermarkets that had large flat roofs closed as a precaution, fearing structural failure. Transportation had ceased almost entirely. Amtrak had suspended its Metroliner service between New York and Washington. Major airports were closed. All roads in New Jersey were effectively closed. Hundreds of people found themselves stranded at train stations in their cars